All right, we're going to take a look at one of the problems from the project here. This is the one where we are summing an 8-sided die and a 4-sided die. So what we had done previously was we made a column for die 1, we made a column for die 2, and then we found the sum. So for die 1, we're going to use rand between. So we're not going to use the rand function, but rand between. And if it's an 8-sided die, we're going to say, okay, give me a number between 1 and 8. And then for 1 and 4, we would say rand between 1 comma 4. And then the sum basically just said, okay, die 1 plus die 2. But what I had emphasized in class was I don't want to do this because the only way really to get our 320 sums is to keep scrolling down. Right, of course, the rand between function, that will just trace down. It's not making a reference to anything, so it'll just copy itself as it is. And the sum is, in this case, relative. So it'll scroll down with these. So if I go down to like a random sum down here and I click on the formula bar, we're going to see that it's okay. Yeah, the sum of die 1 and die 2 that are right to the left of it, or just to the left of it. Right, this is a little bit problematic though, because what I didn't want was basically pages and pages of sums where we had 3 columns and you know, we really think to ourselves, okay, this is the way to break it down. But now that I know how to do that, I can do this in one cell. So I was basically saying, take all that, scrap it, and think about doing this in a single cell. So how would I add those 2 dice in one cell? Well, I would just take the 2 formulas I use. So I would do my rand between 1 comma 8, and I would just say plus rand between 1 comma 4. Right, so I'm just doing that in one cell. That sum column didn't really do a whole lot, right? It took the work we had done in the first 2 columns and added them together. So why not just do this as a single cell? And so as soon as we do that, right, this rand between function can be dragged. And the nice thing is we can say, okay, what if I do something like this where I go down to 20 different rows here. So I have 1 column, 20 rows. So I've got 20 of these, and if I just check one of these at random, I always like to do that, right? You've seen me do this in every video all the time. So always check one at random. Does it still say rand between 1 and 8, rand between 1 and 4, and then we add them? Yes. So it does that, and then we can also drag this over. So as long as we have the whole column highlighted, we can drag this thing over, and you might not know, well, how far do we need to go? Now, the nice thing about this is we could have thought, well, all right, if I have 320 total sums, I could, you know, do something that's divisible, something that divides evenly into 320, like 20. So we could do 20 times 16, and that was what I suggested in class and mentioned to a number of you in email. So the other part of this, let me just expand my window here. Or, well, I'll shrink my Excel window. Down here, it'll tell us the count. It'll say how many sums we have. So right now we only have 200, and that's because I've got 10 columns. So if I keep going with this, so if I take this and go, okay, here's 11, here's 12, right? I keep going out. I need to go to 16. It'll tell me, yeah, you've got a count of 320. So you have 320 sums here. Of course, this is pretty big. So one of the other things I mentioned in class was you could highlight all of these cells, or sorry, all of these columns, and then between any 2 columns, it doesn't matter which 2, you're going to see a little scroll here that allows you to change the width. And if I have everything highlighted, I change the width of one of them, it's going to change the width of all of them. So it ends up being a pretty reasonable size, right? It's not terribly wide. And so we could do a 20 by 16 or 16 by 20. That's a couple options that we have. But the biggest thing is we do not want a huge long column that we have to break up or copy and paste or use multiple pages for. That was entirely the intention of saying you can do this calculation in one cell, and basically that I only left you the space that I left you. It was intended to say there's a better way to do this. So 16 by 20, 20 by 16. Now, if we do this, there is a very fast way to find those frequencies that I was asking for. Now notice anytime I hit anything on here, these numbers are changing. So before we do anything else, how about this? Let's do what we did in one of my videos, probably multiple videos, where we use the rand function or the rand between function. We said, okay, your values are going to keep changing, so copy it. You can hit Control C or Command C and then paste it. And I'm going to right click here and show you. We've got all these different paste options. We've got this one that says paste it as values. And so let's just paste it as the values. It'll change one last time. But now if I click on any of those and we see in the formula bar, it just has the value. It just has 11. It doesn't have the rand between. So none of these have the rand between. So now they are fixed. They're not going to change as we click on things. So if I hit 2, enter, nothing changes. 3, enter, nothing changes. So we know that our sums for this one are going to be between 2 and 12. And notice in that little box, it says how far I'm going down. So I set up the pattern 2, 3, 4, and then I just drag it down. And then the frequency, we should not be doing this by hand. I gave us a number that was so large, 320, that you should have been like, oh, this is terrible to do by hand. I don't want to do this by hand, right? That's because we've introduced a function previously that does this for us. And this is why watching the videos, trying some of this out for yourself, maybe trying along with the videos would be really helpful so that you get a little bit more of a handle on it, and participating actively in class, right? Making sure that you understand what's happening as your group is working. So the function that we need for this one is count if, right? We're counting how many 2s there are, how many 3s there are, how many 4s. And it'll tell you what it needs. It needs the range. So we're going to say, okay, let's take our range. Our range is all of the numbers that we got right here. And then we say, comma. Then it says, what criteria do you want? Well, we want it to be a 2. So in that range, how many 2s do I have? Apparently I've got 9 of them. Okay, cool. Now if I drag this thing down, we're going to get a really small number, right? The total frequencies, if I add all these up, so I can use my basic sum function and I add all these up, I get 90. I'm supposed to have 320 total. So what's going on here? Well, let's just check one of these. Again, always a good idea to check at random. All right, if I check this, is this the range I want? No, it's shifted down. I made a relative reference when I wanted to make an absolute reference, right? So when I said, hey, my range is A1 to P20, we should have fixed that. We should have put those $ in to make an absolute reference. So now if I drag this thing down, or if I double click, right, we know that we can double click here. We can say, okay, cool, what happens now? And if I check one of these, we say, oh, well, it looks a little better, but I get a bunch of 9s, everything looks the same. Huh, well, all right, the second part of this is a 2, dang it. So I guess we should have maybe, instead of typing in 2, and this is a lesson for us, right? Instead of typing in 2, use a relative reference, right? We have the absolute, that's with the $, that means I want to keep everything. A relative says I want this thing to move with me in my column. So I'm going to choose my sum on the left-hand side here. So I want to know how many 2s show up. And now if I drag this thing down, these numbers are going to change, and let me again check one at random. So let me check the one for the sum equaling 7. Click in the formula bar. This will show you what you need. So is my blue range what I want it to be? Yes, it goes over exactly the values that I wanted it to. And the red says, here's what I want to know the frequency of. That was 7. And once again, I had deleted this before, but we can just verify. Let's just check that our sum here for these frequencies actually does equal 320, right? Have we accounted for all 320 sums? Yes, we have at this point. So again, that COUNTIF function will help you with your frequencies. You don't have to do it by hand. The sum of two rand between functions will help you out here. And then of course, we can go a step further with this, right? We can say, well, what if I wanted to see this as a fraction? What if I wanted to see this as a decimal? We shouldn't be doing any of this really by hand. The fraction version of this is just going to be whatever your frequency is divided by 320, right? We know that we want it always divided by 320 since we did 320 rolls. Not 32 like the theoretical, not 36 like the two 6-sided dice, right? The other part of this is we know that the sum of all these, right, if these are the only possible outcomes, the sum should be 1. Now, sure enough, it is, right? So if I add those together, I get 1. Now, I put this in the fraction portion, and it gave me just values here, right? So I can change this from the drop down. I can go to fraction. Now, these fractions are kind of ugly, right? These aren't great. So you can definitely format this a little bit, and let's look at more number formats. So the default in this case was go to 1 digit. So the denominator's only got 1 digit. Well, okay, we could go to more places. That would be fine. And then we get something a little bit more accurate to what we were doing. So we either see out of 320 or out of something smaller if it simplifies. And then we can just say equals, for the decimal column, we can just say equals the fraction column. But of course these, if I drag these down, right, it's going to copy everything, but that's because we told it to do fractions. We can just do numbers. And then it'll give us the decimal version, right? These are not to enough places. So let's just expand, oops, sorry, the other one, right? Expand our decimal places. And depending on what I asked, in this case, I believe I asked for 5 decimal places, right? Go out to 5 decimal places. And then sure enough, we can say, well, what about the sum of these, right? Because they should all add to 1 again, just like the fractions did. And these do add to 1. Now, if they added to something like 1.00001, that's fine. That just means that because of the rounding, we didn't go to enough decimal places to be, 100% accurate. But this looks like it's good. It's going to 1. So we have all those little pieces. Now they're pretty quick. They've all shown up in videos, but of course I'm asking us to kind of take everything we did from the entire unit, put it together. This is part of why I said, hey, after every section, go take a look at the project. There's something you can do from this section that goes into the project. And, by the time we get to the end, we've got, multiple sections. In this case, we had, I think, about 5 sections that we were trying to pull together. So it can absolutely be a little bit confusing. It can absolutely be a lot to take in at once, but that's why starting early is important and asking questions is important. Yes, you can check in with your classmates. Please make sure your work is your own. And please check in with me if you've got questions. Tutoring is also helpful, although the tutors probably are not super well versed with Excel. So when it comes to the Excel specific questions, you may want to check in with me. Okay, so this is the idea behind those 2 dice. One other thing I wanted to mention. If you, instead of doing what I did with summing an 8-sided and a 4-sided, if you did a rand between and you said 1 to 12, here's the problem with that. That is a single 12-sided die that you are simulating. So it does not have the same likelihood as 2 dice being rolled separately and then added together. So here again, I'm going to copy this data and just paste it as values. And you can see what these frequencies look like. They're gonna look a lot more similar. All of these kind of look like about the same, right? We have an occasional weird one, like there were only 15 6s, whatever. But the least likely sum should be 2 and 12, and yet those are 0.1 and very close to 0.1, right? Those look like a uniform distribution. So if you had gone this route, I knew that something was amiss because of the numbers that came out, because of the frequencies and the fractions and decimals that came out. So there's a huge